the development of the UK over the last couple of years, we've seen a big shutdown in baseload power stations because they're too old and they're too polluting, and we're replacing them with a lot of wind, and that's increased the intermittency. Whereas before we could simply tell a power station to switch on, we can't tell the wind to blow faster, and we can't tell the sun to shine harder when we want to.
Sometimes you're needing to take wind energy while it's blowing, but you don't need the energy at that moment. Sometimes you're constrained about how much power you can put back out onto the network.
So there's a lot more electricity that's generated from intermittent sources that we can't control, but we still need to be able to deliver power to our consumers as and when they want it.
We're fortunate on CLNR to be able to deploy 6 different battery types. The primary reason for having 6 different batteries at various scales, some being large, some being medium and some being small, is that we can fit them across the entire range of our distribution network.
We tend to see voltage problems out on the long, stringy rural networks, and we tend to see overload problems on the short, fat urban networks, which is why within the CLNR programme we've gone to a dense urban network out of Rice-Carr and a very sparse rural network out of Denwick.
So before even we put the batteries in place, we were looking at what might happen and how we might use these batteries, particularly how we might use a battery instead of demand-side response or in conjunction with demand-side response. So we're going to see some real needles moving on some real substations as the batteries are switched on and off and compared to the academic models for the experience we had predicted.
One of the low-carbon technologies that has become prevalent is photovoltaic cells on people's roofs. One of the impacts in that is that photovoltaic cells began to distribute themselves in a cluster, and some of those clusters were causing us a great amount of concern. One of our specific sites where we're looking at the impact of solar PV on the electricity network is at Maltby, a site just outside Sheffield. One of the benefits in having the energy storage system there is about capturing some of that solar PV that's being generated during the daytime and discharging it during the evening.
We're up here at Wooler, which is in Northumberland. Today we've been delivering the equipment onto site, which is part of the electrical energy storage system.
One of the problems that we have in a village like Wooler is the infrastructure is very old, and it's very expensive to excavate streets to put in new distribution feeders. And what we're hoping this equipment will be able to do is to take some of the load off of those aging feeders and transformers and prolong the life remaining in those system components.
I think where the customer-led network revolution really does distinguish itself from what's gone before, it's the integration of that storage with the other technical solutions of voltage control or real-time thermal rating, along with the customer solutions of demand-side response. So it's bringing it all together and using energy storage as part of the mix in terms of being a solution for the future.
Storage is widely recognised as being one of the key technologies that needs to play a big part in the smart grid, alongside other flexibility like demand-side response, for example. But what hasn't really been explored is the economics of it and the business case. We are building Europe's largest battery energy storage facility, and it's probably the first practical demonstration of actually operating storage in multiple markets in the UK.
The bare component, kind of the battery cell, we've got just over 50,000 of those. They're arranged in just over 3,000 trays. It's 6 megawatt throughput, 10 megawatt hour lithium-ion battery, enough for about 430,000 people to make a cup of tea, which is quite a lot.
It's been really important for us as UK Power Networks to keep the community engaged and on board with the project. Right from the very beginning, we had to go through a full planning consent process for the development here. So we engaged a lot with the residents then and asked feedback about the look and feel of the building, and I think that's been really appreciated actually.
One of the most important things to sort of recognize is that a battery or a wind turbine or a hospital, they don't sit in isolation, they all sit together on the grid. And by making them work together, we generate as much value as possible, and we increase the value to all of them, to each other.
One of the biggest benefits is being able to defer some network reinforcement that we'd otherwise be having to do at site now. So that would involve installing a very long new overhead line circuit and an extra transformer. But that's not the only benefit that we're trying to get here, and in fact it's not enough to justify the economic case as a whole. So what we're looking at filling the gap with is using some of the capacity in the battery to help stabilise the wider electricity system, just in case there are faults or outages elsewhere on the system. And then another one is trying to stabilise the frequency of the network. So the frequency of our network in the UK is 50 Hz everywhere, and National Grid's role is to try and maintain that as close as possible. And we can help do that by either absorbing or injecting power into the grid in real time.
The Climate Change Act, which was enacted in 2008, effectively put the UK onto a trajectory of moving towards a low-carbon economy.
The way we use energy is going to change massively, and with electrification of heating and with electric vehicles, there are going to be far more devices on the electricity network.
The way we're generating electricity is also changing, and we need to find different ways to manage that to ensure security of supply.
Technology has come on leaps and bounds in recent years, particularly in terms of communications, electronics and control. And so we're looking at making the most of these new technologies.
The drive to a low-carbon economy has got lots of people thinking about how can we not build network infrastructure. How can we integrate customers more into the development and operation of the network? So ourselves and all the other participants in the energy sector have started to think about how can we persuade customers to reduce their consumption at times where it's beneficial to us as network operators, and holistically that means that they save money and we save money in the longer term.
In Project Falcon, we are trialling alternative techniques to conventional reinforcement to see whether they're cheaper, more effective, more efficient than conventional reinforcement. Part of the Falcon project is trialling demand response. There are two specific ways we're looking at doing this within the project. One is to ask industrial and commercial customers in the local area for up to 2 hours with a 30-minute notice period to use their generators or their alternative source of supply other than main supply. And as part of taking part in the trials, we give them a financial incentive.
Anglian Water's biggest challenge is a changing climate and ever-increasing demand for energy and water. So when we were invited to join in this innovative project, I was delighted to accept.
The control room in Western Power Distribution will identify a theoretical constraint on our network. We will then phone Anglian Water.
Hello, this is Edith from Western Power Distribution.
And ask them to, within 30 minutes, switch on their alternative generator.
Thank you.
It's the right thing to do, and we hope that it will bring benefits for Anglian Water, but also more widely for the distribution network operators area as they try and manage a more and more constrained network.
The other aspect of the trials is to ask a different set of customers to take part in load reduction. So reduce their electricity usage at a certain time of day for a certain period of time. We're only looking at specific times of day, and the ultimate aim is to reduce peak demand times of day and the winter peak specifically.
Demand response as part of the Thames Valley Vision is a huge part of our project. We're engaging 30 industrial and commercial customers into some load shedding programs where we learn to understand how much people can reduce energy, how flexible they can be, and what impact that has on reducing network constraints.
The technology that we're providing to SSEPD is our Automated Demand Response Solution, or ADR. It's a software-based solution, it's cloud-based, which means it's on a remote server that can be accessed via the internet.
When we first log on, we get to see a list of all the participants that are enrolled onto the program, and then we can look at the various events that we can do. So I simply then hit Add Event on the system. This then brings up a screen whereby I can choose the start and finish time of that event. The customer will get an email, and they've got two options then. If they do nothing, the load shed will happen pretty seamlessly. If they do decide to opt out, maybe they've got a big event on where they need a full function of the building, they can simply log onto the portal and opt out. The load shedding strategies are compiled between our surveyors, which is our partners Honeywell, and the individual customer.
Our engineer, along with the building owner's facility manager or engineering manager, do a survey of the building, look at all the electrical plant devices in that building, and identify what can be turned on, off, up, down, putting all that together in a way that won't impact the performance of the building and won't affect the comfort conditions for the people inside it.
I must say they were excellent. The engineers were first class, did a fantastic audit. Even though it's a new building, they thought there was a lot they could do to save us energy. When the project was set up, they did mention that there was an opt-in, opt-out option, but to my knowledge we've never ever had to implement that.
In essence, the CLASS project is all about demand response. It's using the known relationship between voltage and demand. And in simple terms, what that means is if you are able to reduce the voltage slightly, then you can reduce the demand on the network slightly, and vice versa. The idea is if we can provide a demand response from our customers when our system assets are at their peak, we can reduce that peak, which allow more and more customers to connect their low carbon technologies to our network and provide us a window of opportunity to further reinforcement. And what the CLASS project will do is it will move the voltage up or down. Now, reality is that will have very little impact to customers. And the example I would give is that if you dropped the voltage to a kettle by 2%, it will just take 8 seconds longer to boil. But to test that hypothesis, the customers will observe no impact. We are doing some extensive customer trials to be able to show that we can provide this demand response from all our customer base and that there is no customers who observe when we do it. If you can show that you can provide a demand response and what that size is and provide it very quickly, there is the potential to be able to get customers to provide a demand response to the system operator. Rather than the system operator, that's National Grid, purchasing very expensive ancillary services, there is the potential that they could be going directly to customers to provide those services for them, which would mean in the longer term a much cheaper balancing set of services for National Grid.
Smart Grid is bringing together new technologies, new commercial offerings, and giving customers a better service where they can actually benefit and save money.
It's really a situation where electricity is managed more proactively. Customers are more involved in the management of their own energy.
It really does give us the opportunity to start offering alternative solutions, alternative tariffs, and the customer feedback is they really want this.
As a country, we've committed to decarbonising our economy, and we see at least two ways of doing that. One is through network technology, and the other is what we call customer flexibility. And we want to understand how much benefit there is in network flexibility, how much in customer flexibility, and in what situation you do use each. So customer trials are a really important part of finding solutions for the future. The customer trials cover a very wide range of customers, from large numbers of small domestic customers through to small and medium-sized businesses, large industrial and commercial customers, and also small generators.
We've got customers with solar PV, electric vehicles, heat pumps, etc. But the interesting ones we're looking at are demand-side response.
Two specific pieces of technology we're using on this trial, we're calling them smart grid ready technologies, things like the smart wash machine and smart heat pump. What this does is it uses a large tank of water which it heats up to provide the main source of heating and hot water for the house. The heat pump is still using electricity, but if there were an issue with the grid where we needed to reduce overall electrical demand, we could send a signal to that heat pump which would reduce its consumption down to almost zero. However, the householder's supply would still be run from their heating and their hot water from this tank of hot water, so they wouldn't really notice any effect on them, but the overall electrical consumption and therefore the stress on the grid would be reduced.
With the old system, we used to have it on a timer. The system on this one will be a nice constant temperature so that it's not going up and down all the time. We're not getting younger, so as old age pensioners, it appeals to us.
We've had some really interesting initial findings where we've had customers make some real behavioural change. They've reduced their consumption during peak by 10% on average, and they've actually reduced their overall consumption by 3%. So we're really happy with that. That was kind of what we set out to achieve, and it's great to actually see that change in customers' behaviour.
Initially we had a group of builders come in and reinforce the floor in the ceiling. We had a guy turn up to deliver the batteries, which they put up into the attic. Then we had a group of builders come round to start the wiring. Western Power have also kept us up to date of step-by-step progress.
Before we had the batteries, the solar panels were only using their full benefit when the sun was up. Now they can actually use it when the sun's down because we've got the batteries which store the electric from the sun.
That bit there shows us how full our battery is. So our battery is at 60.
The tablet will help me be more energy aware. It will show me how much energy is in my battery. It will show me how much energy we're producing at the moment. It also shows me how much energy that we're using as a household. We discussed it, we sat down, we chatted about the solar panels and what they do. And obviously the children have been learning about it at school as well. So as a family, we make sure that the lights aren't left on in rooms that we're not in. We don't leave the television on if we're not using it. Little things like that really that we didn't necessarily do before, but we do now.
One of the areas of research in Low Carbon London is to really understand how smart meters can be used by the distribution network operator.
As a partner of the Low Carbon London programme, EDF Energy recruited and installed smart meters into customers' homes across London. We then went out and recruited around 1,100 of those customers onto the dynamic time of use trial.
We get a message a day ahead saying that tomorrow's tariff will be low, for example, from in the morning but high in the evening, and we simply know to run our washing at that point in the morning instead of when we get back. We get the signal via the display that sits in our flat, and we also have the supplier send our messages to our mobile phones. So it's quite straightforward and it's easy to know when things are coming up.
The high tariff was designed to discourage customers from using their energy during peak times. For example, when commuters come home from work, they put on the kettle to make a cup of tea or coffee, and you would see a huge spike on the grid.
The unique component of Low Carbon London is the dynamic nature of the time of use. This really allows the network operator to simulate fault conditions, sending out high price signals to customers and asking them to reduce during times of constraint. Where there's high wind scenarios on the system, which means low carbon electricity available, we've provided low price signals. This really encourages customers to increase their use of electricity during these low carbon periods.
The government's objective is to roll out smart meters to all homes and small businesses by 2020, and EDF Energy's aim is to put the customers at the heart of that smart meter rollout.
The overwhelming message is people want to understand their electricity bill much better than they do now. And finally, people have asked actually to stay on the tariff. They really like being able to stay in control of their electricity consumption.
The CLASS project is using the known relationship between voltage and demand to provide a demand response. And in simple terms, what that means is if you are able to reduce the voltage slightly, then you can reduce the demand on the network slightly. And what the CLASS project aims to do is to work out the mathematical relationship between voltage and demand for every half hour in the year. If you are able to do that, you are then able to predict the type and size of demand response that you will potentially get in a half hour next year. And that's hugely important. Now, reality is that will have very little impact to customers. But to test that hypothesis, we are doing some extensive customer trials. We sent leaflets to around 440,000 customers explaining what the CLASS project was, explaining the CLASS trials and asking them to volunteer to participate in the customer surveys that we did. And we did a number of local radio programmes to highlight that fact. We wanted 1,000 customers and we actually stopped taking volunteers' applications when we got to 5,000 because we were completely overwhelmed with the response that we received from customers. People were interested in understanding what CLASS was about, not only just to partake in the trials, but to understand what we were doing as an innovator in the Northwest. We've got a control group of customers and we've got a normal set of customers. So we will tell some customers that there are some trials happening when there isn't, and we will tell some customers that there are not trials happening when there are. We will then survey those customers after those trial periods to understand whether they have noticed anything different in their quality of supply. There is a much greater understanding of energy efficiency and the use of electricity because it dominates a lot of public debate. It's in the headlines, if not every day, every other day. So I think when an interesting project like CLASS comes along, people will naturally want to get involved.
Carbon monoxide is produced when any fossil fuel is not burnt properly. 40 people on average die per year due to carbon monoxide poisoning. If you look at carbon monoxide alarms in people's homes in comparison to smoke alarms, The population currently sits at about 84% ownership of smoke alarms within people's homes. However, carbon monoxide detectors within people's homes is around 14%, so there's a long way to go to actually get these alarms into people's homes.
The Intelligent CO monitor is a carbon monoxide monitor that communicates remotely. We've installed a SIM card with a communications module into the detector. What it does is it communicates directly to multiple mobile devices and also communicates with a web-based portal. If the detector picks up high levels of carbon monoxide, it still sets off a local audible visual alarm, but it also sends a text message to the portal. Any alarm that comes in red, that flags up at that particular address there's been a high level of carbon monoxide detected. This detector is particularly of interest to the vulnerable, the elderly and the young. These people are more at risk.
With the new 3G technology, it's really exciting that there's the potential to remotely monitor these properties, know when there's unsafe levels and get an emergency response to that property.
Our target market is the social landlords and large private landlords. If you've got 30,000 homes, it's not practical to check them physically every week. Most manufacturers will recommend that you test the unit once per week. Ours does that automatically, so it wakes up, does its self-check and sends a text message back to the portal.
We're due to start piloting the new equipment in November. That will start within the Northern Gas network, and then we will roll out fairly quickly afterwards once we've reviewed that initial pilot with National Grid and then followed by Wales and the West. And between all three networks, we'll be looking to make sure that we can target each of those vulnerable groups.
The makeup of our grid is changing quite a lot. We're going from lots of big fossil fuel power stations and we're decarbonising.
The grid is at capacity. There's no more allowed on. Those cables that we have limits.
With growth in all scales of wind and solar PV and low carbon technologies, we need to find ways of being able to manage those constraints on our network.
The ARC project is designed to connect renewable generation to the distribution network as quickly as possible at minimal cost. We're looking at three areas. There's the planning side for developers, there's the commercial side, and then there's the actual technical side and how to get renewable generation onto the existing network without reinforcement costs.
The challenges that we are facing before connecting and operating the wind farm are huge. We have the consent challenge, which is a very major hurdle that every wind farm has to go through planning consent, and this might take many years. And then we have to connect to the system to start generating electricity and exporting to the network, which is now in a very constrained network. This is very, very difficult, and we are facing many, many problems with that.
The online curtailment tool is a product that we're developing through ARC to offer up a service to customers seeking a connection, giving them early visibility of what the likely constraints are going to be. The advantage is the speed in which the customer can get access and the information required to make informed decisions.
The technical challenges are physical. Cables can only carry so much electricity, and so we have to work within those safety limits. We are developing an active network management server that uses real-time data to control renewable generation.
Effectively, active network management is a very clever computer program, operating at very high speed, coming up with new set points every 600 milliseconds. If generation into the network is excessive, it issues constraint instructions to various generators. Because it's operating so quickly, we have real-time control. Therefore, we can operate the system far more efficiently and connect more generators.
We've developed over the last year a very positive engagement process with National Grid, and we hope that by the end of 2014 we'll be able to issue our first commercial offerings to generators who are currently facing constraints around transmission.
The benefits that we are hoping to get from the ARC project is to get connected earlier in the system when we don't have to do all the transmission reinforcements, and also when we are connected to minimize the time that we are curtailed during an outage.
Being able to get renewable generations onto the network allows the community to generate an income. If a community project can connect beneath a constraint, then they can really harness that electricity and that benefit for themselves.
What we have seen in ENA Smarter Networks is a significant increase in the interest and actual connections of renewable generation. This boom, driven by the government incentives, has had a significant effect on the available capacity. So we are looking to develop new solutions, new products that we can help distributed generation customers to get access to networks in cost-effective ways. The Flexible Plug-and-Play project is focusing on developing solutions for connecting renewable generation in constrained parts of the network. One of the typical examples that we started working with was a connection that the site of the wind farm was only 500 meters away from the point of connection that we would normally be able to allocate, but due to the constraints on that line, we had to offer that customer an 11 kilometers underground cable to a different substation that had capacity, which resulted in a multi-million-pound connection offer. The Flexible Plug-and-Play offering was based around the principle that the electricity line is full, but is not full all the time. So what we can do is connect the generator on that line, having the ability to control their outputs through the bespoke wireless communications network that covers the whole area. So we've developed a commercial contract whereby the network operator has the ability to regulate the power output of the wind farm. So when we see the flow on the line reaching the operational limits of the line, we send a signal to the generator to reduce their output. ENA Smarter Networks has committed to embed this innovation into standard business practices in 2015.
Larwick Power Station is a lifeline service for Shetland. We're not connected to the national grid here, we're an islanded network, and we supply 12,500 homes, schools, businesses, hospitals, and we're responsible for keeping the lights on 24/7.
The power station on Shetland is at the end of its useful life, so we're basically on a massive opportunity. We're going to be able to build a new power station. And what we want to do is turning the whole model on its head. Nines is kind of the future of the energy network. At the moment, what we have to do is turn the power station up and down as you switch on and off load in your house. What we want to do in the future is being able to take the wind energy that's available when it's available and adjust demand in your home to allow us to operate the system. So what we're trying to do is store energy in people's homes so they can get a hold of that energy when they need it.
We're looking to install new immersion water cylinders and storage heaters in customers' homes. The devices are far more efficient. They'll store the energy until the customer needs it. They'll be more controllable, and because of this increased efficiency, there should be a reduction in their energy bills.
The low-cost energy storage solutions that we're coming up with in Shetland could be directly applied to the UK and help to solve some of these problems as they come along.
power is very important to National Grid. It is a growing source of energy. We receive very detailed weather forecasts for the locations of the major wind farms. And we feed that into our computers, and a forecast for wind speed turns into a forecast for wind power. And that's then used to know whether greater reserves are needed so that more power can be called upon at short notice. Holding reserves costs the electricity consumer and the industry more money. The forecasts that we receive at the moment are very good, but they have a certain amount of error in them. And we want to minimise that error even more if we possibly can. It made a lot of sense to approach the meteorological department at Reading University, where they have worldwide expertise in weather forecasting, and we wanted to know if there was anything new that we could do to improve our systems.
Weather is incredibly complex, and so to forecast it, you need to gather as much data as you possibly can from a range of different sources. So from radar, satellite, just observations near the ground, and then assimilate all of this data into a model, and then run this model to see what will happen going into the future.
My research in particular is focused on extreme wind power events and also how predictable they are. Looking back over 34 years, we get a huge range of different weather scenarios, and we sort of try and infer from the wind speeds what would have happened given the present distribution of wind farms. This plot shows an example of the kind of statistics that we've produced in this project. We can ask the question, how long was the longest low wind period over the last 33 years? And from this type of graph we can read off, say, for example, that the power dropped below 10% of its highest possible value for a period of 12 days. This is really important for National Grid to know, because if the wind speed drops below a certain amount, then that power has to be sourced from elsewhere on the grid, and that shortfall has to be made up.
We've looked at a number of different offshore wind farms, so we're trying to set up a model which looks at how the wind speed varies across the farm for different wind conditions. Here we have some results from the model, and this is for a large offshore wind farm, and we're looking at the reduction in wind speed as you propagate through the farm. And you can see a 20% reduction in the wind speed between the leading edge and the downstream edge. The model's set up now, so we can run it for any wind farm we want, and we can therefore see what the power characteristics of that wind farm might look like. I particularly like the relevance of our research and how we can actually see it being used in operation at National Grid.
It's very motivating for the researchers. So working with industry and understanding what the real network challenges are, that then helps us build better models, run better science that's got real impact.
The more renewable energy that we have installed on the National Grid, the more uncertainty that brings us. And if we can manage that uncertainty and reduce it with accurate forecasts, then we can reduce our reserves and save money and run the system more economically and more securely.
We're managing a system which transports a highly flammable gas, and some of our assets have been around since the 50s and the 60s, and some of them have been installed fairly recently, and we have to manage that portfolio of assets in a really controlled and efficient manner. There's probably two things that we've got to consider in terms of this process: is the asset health, the actual physical condition of those assets and how they're performing, whether they've got any faults on them. But the other thing is what we call criticality, which is how critical those assets are to the network. All of the gas businesses submitted methodologies to Ofgem to derive asset health scores and asset criticality scores. However, each of the gas network operators did this process just slightly differently, and because of that the results could not be interpreted comparatively by Ofgem. So the challenge we've got really is to get all of the gas network operators together to look at individual methodologies but come up with a common framework to benchmark both us against the other gas network operators, but also to benchmark the different types of assets against each other. We've been very collaborative in our approach. We've shared data and we've shared resources, and we've effectively opened our books to each of the different companies, and it's something that we probably wouldn't have done before, but we've had to really to understand the approaches that each of the networks have taken in terms of assessing their health of their assets.
In the UK, traditionally, we've taken a lot of our gas from the North Sea, and stocks are depleting there. We also have pipelines coming across from Europe, which bring gas in from Russia. There's risks associated with that, particularly with the political climate at the moment, and the UK, to have a sustainable gas supply going forward, is looking for other options. Things like unconventional gases, which is shale gas, coal bed methane, and also biomethane, all options to use as gas in the future. The project was all about exploring the health and safety risks, the environmental risks, and just putting some guidance in place for both biomethane producers, shale gas producers, and the gas networks in the UK.
We worked with IGEM, the Institute of Gas Engineers and Managers, to research what standards currently exist, and also within those standards what needs to change and what research needs to be undertaken that will allow safe transportation of unconventional gas sources. They are not unfit for use, it's they have different constituents than our normal supplies.
A good example would be oxygen content in natural gas. There's limits set by legislation in the UK as to what it can be, and the reason for that is that we have a lot of steel and metallic pipelines, and oxygen, as we know, speeds up the corrosion process. Now, it's very expensive to clean that oxygen up. Our role as gas distributors was to make sure that whilst maintaining the integrity of our gas supply system with the different gas in it, we didn't make it financially non-viable to inject that gas into the network. The guidance has been received very well in the industry. It's plugged the gap where a lot of various parties were trying to move this forward, but it was clear that there should be one set of guidance in terms of injecting unconventional gases into the network. So this is a collaborative approach by all the networks, and hopefully it should facilitate the injection of unconventional gases going forward.
We've been evaluating whether building information modelling can enhance our current asset management and project management processes. We have a particular challenge with our current regulatory environment. We're trying to deliver projects more efficiently, and this is where we believe that BIM can help us with.
Building information modelling is really about attaching or pegging data to an interactive 3D model. The data you peg or attach can be cost, it can be carbon, it can be technical, it can be asset information, and it allows you to be in control of what you're developing. You can load it during your asset's life. Having a BIM model that you can take forward for the management of the asset for the next 40 years of asset life is very important.
Well, a lot of these sites, as you can see up here on the Humber, they're in quite remote places. We have to schedule monthly, right up to 15 yearly maintenance and legislative inspections to ensure its resilience and integrity throughout its lifetime. The information has to be gathered manually by the operations technicians. They have to go out to these sort of installations you can see behind me. We can then start to put some sort of trend analysis together to be able to look at forecasting for replacement of those ageing assets. The key advantage for building information modelling for National Grid is purely to have one central repository of all the information for the lifetime of the assets. So we'll have all the maintenance data, we'll have all the instruction manuals in there, we'll have all the condition information, so we can go in and interrogate that information and make that a lot faster.
When you start a project, you create a 3D model of the asset. It can be an existing asset, it can be a new asset you're developing. It can be a new asset that you're adding to an existing asset. You develop the model exactly as you're going to build or exactly as you're going to operate. By doing that, it allows you to get rid of those sort of errors that commonly occur on sites. You can almost snag the project before it's built.
We've just come into the 3D model now, and what we can really find useful about this is we can plan for things such as temporary works, plant access to site, formal process safety assessments such as HAZCONs. We can identify hazards at site without actually having to be there. For example, we have a buried hazard here, a gas pipeline. We'd be able to plan for that without actually having to be at site. We can do it all from the 3D model.
You can even sort of program load the model to see where you'll be at various stages of the project and how your project should look at the various stages, which again you can use for managing and project consultation purposes. I mean, it allows all stakeholders in the project, local councils, it can be local authorities, it can be local interest groups, to clearly see what the design intent is. And quite often when people understand what you're trying to do and can see it, it allays a lot of their fears. BIM has been around for 5 or 6 years in the architectural world, but for National Grid it's a bit of a new venture. But some of the work we've been doing with National Grid, we've got a cost savings of sort of 4 to 11%. But we expect those cost savings to increase as we get more experience and the industry gets more experience of BIM and what can be done and can be achieved.
Although we started this on gas transmission, it's wholly applicable across our electrical projects and our security projects. It's about building, it's about a verb, it's not a noun. And therefore in the future I see it working across all projects that we deliver within capital delivery in National Grid.
We're working with a pipe network that is decades, if not centuries old in places.
It's extremely inconvenient and disruptive for the customer and the community when we're digging excavations in the highways. It's extremely expensive to do that.
It's important that when we're maintaining our network and keeping it safe, that we're looking for new ways to be able to do that, because of reducing those costs, we're actually delivering value for our customers, we're delivering value for our shareholders, and we're actually improving the way that we actually operate.
The idea behind CISBOT is go into the pipeline from inside through a very, very small hole in the street and work inside the pipe to seal it and to renew the pipeline's life with a minimal amount of impact on the public.
For the CISBOT project, we carried out the first demonstration project in Woolwich with the larger pipelines that we have, and all the findings that we had from that, how we developed the means of connection, launch, entry, retrieval, we shared with National Grid, who then subsequently applied that to a different diameter, the 18-inch cast iron pipe within their sites.
What CISBOT does is it allows us to enter the main while the gas is still on, and we can place the robot at every single joint, and using 5 cameras and the robotic mechanism, we're able to drill holes into the joint and then inject the joint with a very, very durable, long-lasting sealant.
Using the cameras, we pretty much have a 360-degree field of view. So this is the joint right here. As we're doing this, I can use the controls. I can actually see this injecting with my eyes. The length we can go currently is about 600 feet, and that allows us to go effectively 1,200 feet from one pit.
Today is unique in a way because we've got one hole and we're looking at repairing up to 50 joints. If we try to do that in more traditional ways, as a minimum that would be 50 holes in the carriageway, and today we've got one.
It's a huge benefit for safety, huge benefit for the environment, fantastic for customers just looking around here in terms of the footprint that we've got while we're on site.
CISBOT is a remarkable innovation, and we've demonstrated it now on 2 different networks, and we're looking to commercialise that at the earliest opportunity. We have around 9 kilometres of gas distribution pipelines that we intend to remediate with CISBOT over the next 2 years. And we're also working, very excited, on the NIC project, Network Innovation Competition project for robotics, which is to widen the robotic solution, if you like, for the entirety of large diameter mains remediation, and also look to improve the way that we do services, minimising streetworks.
Gas distribution companies were looking for methods to detect defects and blockages in their pipelines.
To be able to detect where there's a blockage in the main is something that we all struggle with. It can come from anything such as debris in the main or water ingress, which is a huge problem. So acoustic was brought in to address issues that we have for trying to locate where the blockage is in without the need to having to excavate again.
The basic technology is simple. We use a loudspeaker to inject an acoustic signal into the pipe. We use microphones to record the reflections of that signal. What's complicated and requires research is the processing of those measurements, and that's where the bulk of our research is linked with.
So here I have a 3-metre tube, and I'm going to put a blockage in it, which is a small washer. I'm going to insert the washer into the tube, then I use this magnet to move the washer down the tube. So I'm going to run it right down. Now I'm going to attach the acoustic probe to the tube and use it to fire an acoustic impulse into the tube. So that's the acoustic signal that we use, you can hear in the background. Okay, so now we can look on the computer screen and we can see here at around 1.5 metres there's clearly a blockage.
To be able to detect blockage in the main through one single point of entry would be a huge game changer. It would mean less disruption to customers, less excavation.
Acoustic potentially gives us the option of very quickly surveying a network to ensure that it is what we expect it to be. We've all had a look at it and we've all decided that there are potential benefits in the project. So all the networks have signed onto this project.
Within the last probably 25-30 years, there's been very little advancement in the way that you detect a gas leak within the industry. So the way that it's always been done historically is to use your gas seeker, detect the highest reading and dig down and try and locate where the leak is, which means huge disruption to the customers on difficult jobs, specifically in city centre and difficult locations. So the acoustic technology that we brought in, it's got a hydrophonic sensitive camera, and you put it on a rod down the main and it listens to the sound of gas escaping. So the idea is that you can send it 200 metres down a main through one excavation, find out the exact point where it's leaking, and then you can dig down and repair it. So it reduces the amount of excavations in the street and it reduces the disruption to customers. We didn't want to just use the acoustic camera on its own and have it just for the primarily function of locating gas escapes. We wanted to try and combine different types of technology. So we were aware that Scotia Gas Networks were trialling the core and vac. So what we thought we'd do is we'd combine the two technologies and have an end-to-end process.
Core and vac is a combined, uniquely specified vehicle that does coring of the road and also vacuum excavation. It allows us to take a core from the road surface, remove it, use the vacuum excavator, basically a big hoover, suck out the spoil, effect a repair using long-handled tooling, and then put everything back as it was very quickly. So it reduces our street works from, say, 4 or 5 days, where you need to keep going back for different layers of tar, for example, to literally 4 or 5 hours for the grout to set around the core hole. We have 7 of these units in operation right across SGN, 1 in Edinburgh, 1 in Glasgow, and the rest primarily in London, where the largest amount of repair work is carried out.
The feedback amongst everybody in the business, particularly the operational guys. They absolutely love it. It makes their job a lot easier. It means they're having to do the glass holes. We can go in the morning, repair everything, reinstate it and be gone by the time you come back from work without you even knowing that we've been there.
TORS basically is a method to make a service to main connection without the need for excavations. We're able to do this remotely by using our robotic platform.
For a typical section of main, let's say 100 metres long with maybe 10 services connected, you'd be looking at 22 excavations.
Effectively, we began by using an existing robotic platform that we had, and we began the task and the engineering challenge of miniaturising this.
We started with quite a rough and ready robot just to prove the principle. It was too big, it was not at the right size for the maintenance services that we wanted to target.
The greatest challenge is obviously developing a robotic platform small enough to work inside a Tier 1 pipe size. Everything is done from inside the pipe. The robot needs to be able to locate where the service enters the main. It then needs to be able to make a connection between the service and the main, and this is done by drilling a hole. We then insert a special T in order to be able to make a physical connection. Once that service connection has been made, we're then able to pressure test each individual connection before moving on to do the following connection. The next step is to turn the existing concept demonstrators into working, functional, commercial solutions.
We're hoping to get TORS into the field delivering in early 2016. When it does, I think it'll make a tremendous difference to the customers, the community, to National Grid.
Ultimately, TORS eliminates the need for digging holes. Not only the significant cost savings that this will provide, but also reduces the impact on the environment, whilst also reducing the impact on the consumer and road users.
CIP stands for Cured in Place Pipe, CIPP, and with this technology we can now put a felt liner up one of these massive pipes without intrusion into the carriageway. Essentially solidifies, and that becomes a new pipe within the old pipe, and we're good for 40 or 50 more years and perhaps beyond that. It's a technique that actually has been in use in the water industry for quite some time now. And what we've done as a gas industry is actually put a challenge there to the manufacturers to say, could you take this mature technology and actually convert that into something that's fit for the refurbishment of gas pipes?
Today we're going to be trialling a semi-rigid liner made of an impregnated felt, so it's got an uncured resin sitting on it. Pull that liner through, we'll inflate it so it fits snugly to the host, and then we'll cure it using heat as the cure process. Then all we've got left to do is seal that main back up. What this test will allow us to do, it'll show us two things. We'll get to understand the process of how to install the liner in a controlled condition before we do it for ourselves on a network. But we'll also be able to take these pieces of pipe away and put them through some destructive testing.
Ofgem, our regulator, are absolutely encouraging us to spend this money that they've made available to innovate. And the fact that we're actually doing it as 4 GDNs working together with WRC as a partner in something that's not been done in the UK before.